Hello! Our story begins inside Chopper Base. Ezra Bridger is walking around the Ghost, awoken by a continuous nightmare. Every night just a different iteration. One in which his home world, one he was so connected to, suffered under the weight of the Empire. As a result of these raging nightmares, Ezra was wandering, though this particular night something was calling to him. Oddly, it was coming from Kanan's room. He stumbled in, hearing the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. A message Kanan had saved after the fall of the Republic, one that signified the beginning of a new era. However, that couldn't be true. The Jedi holocron that stored the hologram was gone. It had been destroyed when Maul and Ezra merged both the Sith and Jedi holocrons together. Ezra opened the door and saw an image of Obi-Wan sitting before him, telling him to trust the Force, before vanishing. The young Jedi could only assume that this was the Jedi Master calling out to him for help. He had to hope it was Obi-Wan. The Alliance was desperate. Their fight was getting more difficult by the day. Someone like Obi-Wan could be super beneficial to their cause. He could rally people together and be a general like he was during the Clone Wars. This was simply wishful thinking, but Ezra couldn't help but wish that this was Obi-Wan. Instead of being called to Tatooine, he was called to the birthplace of a rivalry, one that Ezra was never privy to. When he had a moment, Ezra snuck away instead of an A-Wing, and made his way to the planet of Naboo. Unbeknownst to him, Chopper had snuck into the back of his A-Wing when he wasn't looking. Ezra wouldn't find out until he arrived over the blue and green planet of Naboo. He was okay with it. Perhaps Chopper could be the added help to finding Obi-Wan Kenobi. They lowered themselves down through the atmosphere to the planet and arrived outside the city of Theed. Chopper noted that one of the hangar bays within the city was clear, so Ezra pulled the vessel down and landed. It was nighttime, so Theed had pretty much gone to sleep. Ezra and Chopper exited the rebel starfighter and walked out of the hangar bay. Chopper inquired about how they might find this Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ezra held broken pieces from the Sith and Jedi holocrons. These pieces were recovered from the blast that revealed the truth. Ezra was given the location of where Kenobi was, and Maul was given the vision of how the Empire would be defeated. The irony is, the Force didn't reveal the truth about Kenobi's actual location, because the one who would aid the bringing of balance of the Force was there, so instead, the Force revealed Naboo, the place where all of Maul's suffering came from. The former Sith was going to use Ezra to find Obi-Wan. He was feeding off of Ezra's desire to do good. Maul had nothing left, and so finally, after years of forgetting about Obi-Wan, he would get his revenge on the man who cut him in half. Ezra and Chopper made their way for the royal palace, as the holocron pieces were leading them there. As they entered through a side door, they were directed towards the hangar bay and the energy plasma room. It was huge. Ezra had never seen anything like it. He continued walking through, looking around, wondering why the Force was guiding them here. As they walked forward, he noticed that there were slots for ray shields, but they were currently all offline. As they closed in, Ezra could feel the presence of Maul. He finally revealed himself, and so he turned around, looking at the former Sith. Maul asked why he was brought to Naboo. Kenobi was supposed to be here. How could the holocrons lie? Was it a lie? A deception? Ezra looked at him, wondering why he sounded so lost. He had heard Maul sound powerful, mad with power, devious, and any number of other emotions, but this was a broken individual, one kept alive by a singular desire to exact revenge. Ezra held a hand over his lightsaber, asking why Maul brought him here. Maul wanted to know the same thing, demanded to know why the Force brought him to a place of such misery. Every ounce of Maul's suffering in life originated from Naboo. Sidious was born here, the man who tortured him for 20 years before killing his brother, not to mention that his greatest rivalry started here, the same place where he killed a Jedi Master and lost to a Jedi Padawan. Maul looked to the ground where he last felt power under his torso, the power of his legs. He pulled his blade from his belt, telling Ezra that if he couldn't kill Kenobi, then he would kill a Jedi Padawan, to atone for his years of suffering. Maul leapt across the room towards Ezra, who pushed Chopper out of the way before igniting his own lightsaber. Maul wanted his revenge. He wanted the proper moment of redemption, and if Kenobi could not meet his end, at least someone could. Ezra backpedaled away from Maul, in a similar fashion to how Qui-Gon pushed Maul back. The former Sith pushed Ezra towards the endless pit. He knew the room like the back of his hand, thinking about it and how he'd make his move without failing. Maul shoved and spun, but the young Jedi was keeping pace. It wasn't easy, but Kanan was a good teacher for a reason. Maul could feel this moment coming up upon him. Ezra didn't even see the hole, and then at the last second, he could feel the ground beneath him coming to an end. Without turning around, Ezra sidestepped a heavy swing made by Maul, one meant to push him down the pit, and then jumped to the side. His boots slid across the ground before looking towards the old man. Maul turned his head and gritted his teeth. He was furious. This was his moment for revenge. Ezra didn't know what to say or even think about this. All he knew was he needed to survive. Maul spun his blade once more before leaping at Ezra, who blocked and parried the incoming strikes. He went out of his way to avoid being slain by Maul. Ezra could see that Maul was getting angry with each strike he made. It was like every time he swung his blade, he was more the younger, more the inexperienced version of himself. To Ezra, it felt like the room they stood in made Maul weaker. He fed off his pain, but the pain was eating him alive. The dark side was a plague, and it seemed it finally got the best of him. Maul swung and struck with all of his might, and Ezra slipped away every time, before making a parry that knocked Maul off of his feet. He looked over at the hole where he lost everything, and then looked back to Ezra, waiting to be struck down, but it never came. The young Jedi kicked Maul's lightsaber to the side where Chopper took the weapon and held it, while Ezra pulled his own weapon to his side. Maul told Ezra to let him go, and without missing a beat the young man told him that he wouldn't. Maul's face showed that of someone not understanding why. Ezra didn't extinguish his lightsaber. He didn't trust Maul enough for that. Instead, he kept his distance and looked over to the hole. He asked Maul why he was here, why anything would bring them to the spot. Maul was disgusted by the answer, and he wished to leave a repugnant remark. But what was the purpose? He didn't care anymore. All of his struggles amounted to him ending up right back where it started. He told Ezra that he was once a Sith assassin to the most powerful being in the galaxy. He trained his entire life to kill Jedi, and he gutted a Jedi Master where Ezra stood. His student was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Ezra couldn't believe what he was hearing. Maul admitted that he defeated Obi-Wan, but through his own arrogance he allowed the Jedi Padawan to best him, cutting him into half and sending him into the abyss. That was the moment everything changed. He was no longer an apprentice. He survived through hatred, and now he was nothing more but a shadow. Ezra looked at the hole and then back to the broken man before him and thought to himself. He told Maul that it wasn't too late to change. Maul had heard this same spiel before from Kenobi. Too late this, that, and the other, but the light was weakness. Ezra paused and shook his head, expressing that he once thought the same. Holding the Sith holocron gave him power, and he believed that that power that he had could be used to save others. But it only took from him, and he almost lost those he cared about because he obsessed over it. Ezra apologized because he knew he couldn't possibly understand what it was like to be tormented by the Dark Lord of the Sith, but he could understand solitude. Ezra deignited his lightsaber and got down on one knee. He told Maul he could believe him or act like none of this ever happened, but for what it's worth, Ezra never believed anyone would care for him. Within the first 24 hours of being with Hera, Kanan, Sabine, and Zeb, he was thrown into the hands of Agent Kallus and abandoned on a Star Destroyer. Ezra admitted that he believed no one would ever come back for him. What he could have never anticipated was what they did, and they continued coming back for him. They embraced him into their family. When he embraced the darkness from the holocron, Kanan stayed with him, even though it wasn't easy. Even though Ezra believed he was right. Maybe none of this would mean anything to Maul, but Ezra believed the darkness would make him stronger. He thought that being alone would be better for him. As he found, it was family that gave him strength. It was the light that gave him hope. It was his belief in what was right that inspired not just himself but those around him. Ezra put his hand on Maul's shoulder and told him that despite the bad blood between them, despite what he had done to Kanan and to his family, perhaps there would be a day when he could find himself a family that would support him the same way that his did him. Ezra pulled his hand away and stood up. He couldn't support Maul. That wasn't his place. But if Maul could find it within himself to be better, then perhaps he could earn a place with Ezra's family. But after threatening to kill his mother, sister, father, and brother, there was no way that Ezra could just be Maul's rock. That was something he would have to find on his own. Maul looked up to Ezra and asked if that was really how they would part ways. Ezra had just a little snark in his response, but it wasn't anything rude or uncommon for him. He said that if Maul came back around, who knows? Maul asked why he should even try it, and as Ezra walked around him he said that being a Sith or whatever he was now didn't do him any good. What was the worst that could happen? Maul looked back, as Ezra took Maul's lightsaber from Chopper and tossed it over to him, before walking out of the energy room. Ezra wasn't sure if he was too harsh. Maybe he wasn't harsh enough, honestly. He knew that Maul deserved to be treated harshly, but he wasn't sure how to do this whole thing. Bringing someone to the light? At least he was reconsidering things, seemingly. The only, and seriously, the only reason, as Ezra explained to Chopper, for him being kind to Maul was because he was willing to die. Ezra didn't care for Maul any more than anyone else in the Ghost Crew. He resented him, but the fact that a power-obsessed individual like Maul was willing to give up told Ezra that something was awry. Chopper called Ezra a couple selective words for being so kind to someone like Maul. Ezra didn't take it personally. He believed he may have just been too kind to a former Sith, but perhaps time would tell. Inside the energy room, Maul was leaning up against the wall. looking at a hole he once fell down. Ezra had a point. He didn't like it, but he did have a point. If the darkness had only given him pain and he struggled for an entire lifetime, what was the worst that would happen if he let go? Maul didn't know how to. He hated Kenobi, and yet at the end of everything, all Maul wanted was a companion, a friend, a brother. Savage was that last remaining brother. Crimson Dawn was full of expendable members, and after he was left on Malachor for who knows how long, he had no one. The issue for Maul is that he never cared about these individuals, even his own brother. Sure, he did care about Savage, but only to the extent of which he could gain something from him. Maul loved his brother because he could be controlled, and it was an exact mirror to how his master treated him, teasing him with feelings of freedom while holding all the power in their dynamic, consistently tearing him down so that his own emotions and power could be heightened by ego, arrogance, and cruelty. Maul's issue was at the heart of him, and it would take everything to realign himself. The dark side itself was killing him. He was on his last legs, searching for a man who should have died 18 years before. Who knows? Who cares? Maybe he died, maybe he didn't. Maul looked at the room in front of him, replaying each moment in his mind. He pondered if he should kill the past or mend with it. He didn't know. He never considered these ideas. He just always focused on more power. As he replayed his fateful mistake over and over and over again, he let out a terrible scream. It echoed out of the entire facility, and he grabbed his lightsaber, throwing it across the room and shattering the hilt into pieces. He watched the crystals tumble out of the husk of their chamber, before remaining still next to the hole. Maul climbed to his feet. It was the first time back since he lost his legs. He looked at the crystals. Each step he took towards them felt like 100 pounds were added to his back. By the time he got to them, he was on his knees, and he spoke methodically to himself. Mind's eye. In his mind's eye. Where was the key? The key to who? Where did it go? Madness had driven him into a shell of the student that was once prided by Sidious. Maul's mind spun around in circles before he slid backwards, an echo bouncing between his ears, mimicking the deathly ill scream he let out at the instant of seeing the replay again. Maul's eyes tore open and he looked into the abyss. He was looking directly into the hole. Only he knew it was down there. Only he had seen the darkness, and what remained were two legs that once belonged to him. Maul's hand grabbed the crystals and he balled it into a fist, tightening with all of his strength, allowing each side of the crystals to pierce his skin. Not enough to cut, but enough to feel the tugging at cells as they pressed into marks. Maul turned back, looking to where Qui-Gon once lay. His eyes moved back to the abyss, as if he were looking into Obi-Wan's eyes. The hopelessness present, his master dead, his battle lost, and above him was a 1 in a million chance at life and death, and he took it. Maul fell back as if Obi-Wan leapt into his face, as it replayed in front of his eyes as he watched Kenobi cut him to pieces, and then he saw a surprised expression before he fell into the abyss. Maul looked at the crystals and yelled again. The echo bounced out of the corridor and then into the main chamber itself. He didn't want this anymore. He couldn't. The dark side was consuming him, and if he let it, then all of his power, strength, and potential would be wasted in a self-agonizing journey of hate, pity, and failure. Maul stepped forward, determined not to become a Jedi, but to reject the darkness and find the light. Ezra would return to his own life, while Maul would continue to fight his inner demons. However, both of them became better because of their experience on Naboo. Ezra expressed that he never found Obi-Wan, and Maul retreated from Naboo to Dathomir. He would find himself a new vessel, one that was a copy of his original ship. Months would speed by, in which Maul would tap into the Force. He wouldn't become a beacon of light like Ahsoka. However, he would be fueled by the light side of the Force. His sabers lost their crimson color, and he gave them a chance to breathe. To really breathe. Instead of blood, he had the color of an ocean on Naboo. It was calm, clean, and purified, but his destiny was not found, not like Ahsoka's. Maul would have a chance to make good of himself. Due to his new outlook on life, he abandoned Dathomir and attempted to find his own family. When he was doing this, he happened to be in the Mandalore system. It was one that he was familiar with, and he had been tracking the Mandalorians to their locations. Specifically, he was on the trail of Sabine Wren, because she was connected to Ezra, and it was Maul's only way to find him if he wanted to. When he noted a bunch of Mandalorians leaving, his trackers led him and his Sith infiltrator to Talon, where the Alliance was engaged with Grand Admiral Thrawn's fleet. When Maul arrived, he had to whip his ship back because ties were coming at him. No one knew who was inside the vessel, and that didn't matter. Maul immediately gunned it for his enemies, firing away the TIE fighters and aiding the Mandalorians. While the Alliance would have survived without his intervention, he helped move the process along a little bit faster. The battle at Chopper Base was a terrible loss for the rebels, but they survived. and that was the key to the rebellion. Despite the losses of Captain Sato and a majority of the Alliance fleet present, the rebels had survived. When they regrouped away from Atalon, Maul was permitted access to the Ghost, where he would have a chance to have an awkward conversation. Due to his inexperience, he expressed that they were now even. Because Ezra hadn't said anything about Maul since his little endeavor to Naboo, no one knew what he was talking about. Ezra kind of smiled and suggested that if Maul was trying to say thank you, then it was his pleasure. Maul kind of shyly nodded his head, turning back. Before he could do that, Hera spoke up, stopping Maul. She told him that she was unaware of whatever happened between him and Ezra, but she was grateful for his actions. She knew that people were capable of change, and perhaps he was too. But what he did for their cause was immeasurable, and that alone, to her, was worth the price of a thanks. Part of him wanted to relish in the moment, and while that was warranted, he figured that it wouldn't have been possible without Ezra. The young Jedi changed the topic and asked to see Maul's lightsabers. Kanan was very on edge, but he waited patiently. Maul handed Ezra the lightsaber without any fight, and it was ignited, revealing a blade not purified but one ringing of Ezra's first lightsaber color. The second side ignited, and he smiled, looking to Maul and noticing the shift in the color of his eyes. Kanan asked Ezra what color it was, and he told his master that it was blue, just like in his eyes. Kanan was impressed. Ezra handed the weapon back over to Maul. There'd be some more conversations, including a private one between Hera and Kanan. Ezra and Maul were talking about his own changes in the past several months. He still didn't know how to change himself fully, but he was working at it every day. His inspiration was Ezra. The words he said challenged him. But because it was done in solitude, he was still having a difficult time with helping others without getting something for himself. As he was talking about that, Hera and Kanan walked out of another room on the Ghost. She told him that there might be a way for them to work on that. Maul was confused, but she told him that the Alliance needed fighters. After the recent loss, they could use anyone willing to fight for their cause. He didn't expect this, but it was an offer to become a part of the Alliance. Maybe not on Yavin, but at least with some members a part of the Rebel Alliance. He accepted the offer, telling her that if he could help take down the Emperor, then he would do it. Ezra called his name and shook his head. Maul looked over and Kanan was doing the same. This couldn't be about revenge. This was about helping others. This was a fight against tyranny as a whole. Ezra reminded Maul that the Empire and the Emperor had taken away from all of them. If they were narrow-minded and focused only on the Emperor, then they would lose this fight. The war against the Empire had to be done together. So, for the following months, that's what would be done. Maul wouldn't be with Ezra all the time, but he would be around rebels. This placed him under the command of Captain Andor, Luthen Rael, and members of the Ghost Squad. His position became relevant in the Alliance. It wasn't easy for him, but he found a sense of completion. Members of the Ghost especially weren't the most trusting of him, and whenever he was around them, he typically was accompanied by a Jedi. Maul understood, but this also aided him as he tried to release the dark curse surrounding him. He would be with the Ghost crew as they went to Lothal, and as he rejected darkness and embraced the light, he was gifted the powers his master promised him. Maul was told as a student that he had the potential of a true Sith Lord. Sidious feared it to an extent because Maul could have become nearly as powerful as he, but he lost to Kenobi. Due to Maul chasing power, he lost when Kenobi beat him, and he never found his stride again. As it turns out, it was never about chasing power. It was about becoming one with the Force. Kanan was the beacon for Maul during this. He was naturally reluctant because he lost his eyes to Maul, but in reality, Kanan was just leading by example. Maul enjoyed listening and watching the Ghost crew. His most trying moment on Lothal would come during a heroic rescue. While Hera and Kanan were atop a fuel canister, Maul was falling behind. He happened to be getting out of the base behind everyone else, just a timing thing. Maul was able to jump up and swipe the legs out from under an AT-AT, warning Kanan and Hera about it. They were able to jump inside a gunship piloted by Sabine. As they did that, the AT-AT fired a blast that clipped the top of the fuel depot. Maul looked up and didn't know where to go, but he created the perfect cover for himself. So as Kanan and Hera flew away with their kids, Maul slipped behind the slashed-down AT-AT and waited out the explosion. As the fuel depot melted around him, Maul was able to slip away from the Imperials as he requested for Sabine to come and pick him up. She was able to do that, and they were able to thank him. Kanan was most grateful for Maul's quick reaction. It saved both his and Hera's life, but truthfully he wasn't sure what would come next for him. He knew the Lothwolves had been preparing him for what would come. That was supposed to be his moment, but Maul bravely stepped in to save everyone. Instead, perhaps it would come later. While Maul's work was remarkable for their squad, the fight wasn't over. The rebels had a series of plans that came afterwards, including the capture of Governor Price and the preparation for the attack on the capital. During this prep, Kanan overheard Ezra explaining a plan to Mart, Wolf, and Vizago. He didn't say anything about it to anyone else, but when the time came and Thrawn's fleet arrived over the capital city, Kanan knew what to do. Ezra was requested to Thrawn's capital ship, and as a result, he snuck away from Hera when she wasn't looking. Kanan and Maul felt it, but it was too late when they did. Because Hera wasn't about to lose her boy, she asked for Maul and Kanan to go and retrieve him, which is something that the two of them were already planning to do, when they realized Ezra had gone to the Chimera. Maul and Kanan still weren't buddies, and they likely wouldn't ever be, but to save Ezra, they could manage working together. Because Kanan heard Ezra's plans, he told Maul to retrieve Ezra while he went to the bridge to stop Thrawn. It was an agreed upon deal, but Maul didn't know what Kanan knew. Their movement to the ship wasn't exactly easy, but they made it work, while the rest of the rebels on the ground went to the control room to fight off Ruck and the other Imperials. Maul was able to get to Ezra while he was fending off the Royal Guard, and at the same time, Kanan confronted Thrawn on the bridge. It was here that Kanan realized that instead of dying on the field depot, he would complete Ezra's mission and hope that the day would come when he could be found wherever he ended up. And so, in a heroic sacrifice like his master, Kanan used what he learned from Ezra in their time together to connect to the Purrgil and take Thrawn far, far away. On the ground, there was a terrible sense of loss. Ezra was heartbroken because that was his op. He was going to do anything from his home world, and Kanan wasn't supposed to go. Maul basically had to drag Ezra away from the Chimera as it was, because when the Purrgil arrived, he knew they'd be whisked away with them. Maul was hopeful that Kanan would escape, but he never did. Ezra was an emotional wreck because it was his plan, and the closest thing he had to a father had gone to who knows where, but he couldn't focus on his emotions in the moment. Instead, he had to help his friends escape from the dome, before it was sent into orbit and destroyed by a triggered reaction. Ezra was apologetic about everything, saying that he was supposed to be the one that was sent away. Hera understood where his heart was, but she told him that neither Kanan or her would have forgiven themselves if he was sent away with Thrawn on his own. Kanan did what was necessary. She knew that they would find him someday. She then turned to Maul and thanked him for what he had done. While she obviously would have preferred if he was the one sent to Peridea, she was happy that she didn't lose both of her boys. The rebels would win the fight over Lothal, and despite fear of the Empire's eventual return, they wouldn't ever come back. The planet was freed, and it would become a symbol of freedom across the galaxy. For the Alliance, it was a huge strike because the Ghost Crew, alongside other greatest allies, fought off the Empire by themselves, without the assistance of the larger Alliance. It was proof that no matter the insurmountable odds, that the fight isn't over until hope is gone, and the rebels never lost hope on Lothal, which is why the tyrannical power of the Empire was flushed away. Ghost would stay together for the most part. Sabine would stay with Hera and the rest of the rebels. While Ezra was still iffy about trusting Maul, he couldn't help but see how much he had changed since Naboo. Maul's desire to do good was rightly placed, however, his methods were a little more unethical. He had a lot of the same fire that Saw Gerrera had, the want to take down the Empire, but without the care of who else got affected in the process. After Lothal, Maul realized what the fight with the Alliance would be like. He and the Ghost would continue running missions just like they did after the battle at Chopper Base. They would be present with General Syndulla during the Battle of Scarif, and they would miss out on the Battle of Yavin, due to some comeuppances between battles. Hera was a new mother, and her third boy was the newest addition to the Ghost Crew. Obviously Zeb and Jabba were the other two. Despite learning about the one named Skywalker being crucial during the fight against the Death Star, Maul and Ezra wouldn't have any interactions with him. Luke was out running missions with Han, Chewie, and Leia, and because of this, times never lined up for the Ghost Crew to be around them at the same time, all that frequently. Hera did run into Luke once, but that was about it. There was also one other thing. Maul and Ezra came up with a plan and suggested it to Hera. She was very iffy about the idea, but in the weeks after the destruction of the Death Star, she knew that it could be effective against the Empire. What the two of them suggested was finding Ahsoka and then taking down the Emperor together. Maul had a theory. If Ahsoka was still alive, and theoretically the Bringer of Light, as he referred to her, then with Ezra and his help, they could defeat the darkness. Maul admitted that he continued to grow in his own strength, which admittedly was overshadowed by what Ezra had been able to do in the same amount of time. Mostly because Maul was at a point in his life where he had expanded outwards enough, and he was reaching a peak in the light, whereas Ezra, who was much younger, was really beginning to tap into his full potential. Hera liked the vision, but she was unsure about the plausibility of its execution. She didn't want to lose anyone else, and she wasn't willing to sacrifice Ezra for Palpatine. This was one of her own greater struggles. The thought of losing Ezra was nearly unbearable for her, especially because she now had Jacen, or in other words, the birth of Jacen heightened her maternal instincts. Both of them understood that, and Maul told her that he would protect Ezra with his life, no matter what happened or who they faced. She reluctantly agreed to the mission, but essentially demanded that she be updated consistently, which they agreed to. Ezra and Maul wouldn't have really any luck finding Ahsoka, or getting anywhere close to the Emperor. They were traveling inside the Phantom, so it was easier for them to sneak around, but things felt hopeless in a way. But their time with each other was essential for both of them. Ezra was able to learn more not just about the Force, but the art of lightsaber combat, while Maul was able to finally have the friend that he'd been dying to find. He knew that having a connection with someone wasn't about controlling them, but simply enjoying them for who they were. He understood that now. Maul knew he couldn't control Ezra, and he understood that their dynamic went both ways. Also, something about helping Ezra along his own journey as a Jedi was very rewarding for Maul. He never had any intentions of becoming a Jedi himself, but seeing how much Ezra enjoyed the growth within himself brought Maul a sense of joy. It would take nearly a year for them to finally find and run into Ahsoka. During this time, they had stopped back at Rebel Base to see Hera and Jacen a few times. Sabine sometimes ran missions with them, as well as Zeb and Kallus, but it was mostly Maul and Ezra. When they found Ahsoka, they were very relieved and excited. She was on edge about the whole thing, but he had come around. Yes, he was someone who took pride in the murder of the innocents, and had caused great amounts of suffering. He knew that they could never go away, but he also knew that if he didn't fight the Empire, then it would never get better. Maul never shied away from taking responsibilities for what he had done. But once Ahsoka was informed of their little plan, she knew she was in. It wouldn't be easy, but they could do it. Maul during this time had referenced Sidious' obsession with the Sith of the past and the secret Sith locations around the galaxy, but he didn't know of any of them except for Malachor, but he found that on his own. Sidious kept everything close to the chest. Ahsoka believed that they used trackers on the Emperor's vessels, they might be able to find where he was going. So to find out, they went to Coruscant and allowed Ezra to go undercover by stealing Shock Trooper's armor and then going to the Royal Palace, Executive Building, and Senate Building. As he was committing identity theft as Brom Titus or whoever this time, Maul and Ahsoka had their first real talk since she returned. Ezra was usually around, and when he wasn't, they were typically on a mission with other rebels, so this was the first moment for them to really understand where each other was coming from, or more specifically, a chance for Ahsoka to see where Maul's head was. He no longer was doing this at a personal gain. Revenge was one thing, and he knew that, but he no longer chased revenge. If he did, then he'd be no better than the man that he was when he was cut in half on Naboo. Instead, he was doing this because he wanted to help the galaxy be free. While yes, the act of killing Sidious was the same in both circumstances, the reason for doing it was important to Ahsoka. If Maul was in on it only for himself, then he could turn on them once he got what he wanted. But his change in demeanor showed that he didn't care about what happened to him. All he wanted was to do right by the people of the galaxy. The trio would continue to track the Emperor for months, seeing no change in his patterns. It was a tiresome wait. The reason they were waiting is because Sidious obsessed over his master's teachings. Maul remembered it. He knew that at some point Sidious was going to pounce on Plagueis, but he knew his master was a brilliant Sith Lord. He craved knowledge of the Force, and immortality was his biggest hunt. Maul recalled moments in his madness, where his master would pace around, repeating to himself, Plagueis the wise, Plagueis the wise, Plagueis the wise. It was a never-ending loop. In the moment, he believed Sidious had gone mad, but it turned out he was a genius. Ahsoka did have an interest in finding Skywalker, but she believed that it could wait. Maul and Ezra had given her all the information they had on him as it was. Eventually, the trio would find the Emperor's vessel, chart course to somewhere in the unknown regions. Because their tracker could identify specific points along the way, the trio made their way to Exegol. Before arriving to the planet, they used the tracker's identifying points to make their way through the red honeycomb zone before landing outside a massive Sith temple. Sidious could feel their presence the moment they landed, and so he sent out his Sith Eternal to bring them in alive. He could use them for cloning experiments. As they rushed out like a hive mind, he made his way to his evil throne and sat, closing his eyes and allowing the darkness to wash over him. Ezra, Ahsoka, and Maul walked forward, their eyes peeled over each other's shoulders. The ground began to rumble as they continued forward, and then the first set of evil shadows charged at them from the abyss. Green, white, and blue lightsabers ignited, as the three Jedi stood side by side, preparing for this engagement. As they got closer, the Jedi moved in with force. They hadn't worked together at this magnitude, but the likes of two Clone War vets and someone as talented as Ezra, There was nothing these cultists could do to stop their approach. The three of them moved in tandem, using the Force, using their lightsabers, and each other to press forward. But the approaching number of Sith Eternal members continued to form around them. It very quickly became like a stone within a river. Ahsoka and Maul were fending off with their dual lightsabers as Ezra saw something. He told them to cover him, as he doubled back and whipped his lightsaber across the chamber. As he did, Maul got in front of him and protected him from a couple of Sith daggers. While the lightsabers were in transit, he used all of his strength to throw a bundle of cultists backwards. Ezra turned over and pulled his lightsaber back from his hand, as he did a kickflip over a cultist before bracing himself with the blade. The sound of a Sith statue could be heard tumbling over. The Sith Eternal split up, and those who were caught in the confusion were crushed by the statue itself. The three Jedi got to each other's sides, fighting and fending off the horde as they continued to grow. What Ezra did worked, but it only slowed them down. There were thousands of cultists here, and they wouldn't have the energy to kill all of them and then fight Sidious. Maul noticed a chain ahead of them and told them to break for it. As they did, Maul's leg was snatched, but Ahsoka stepped in, telling Ezra to go. He did, and Ahsoka cut the cultist down before helping Maul up and charging towards the massive chains. He called out to Ezra and told him to cut the line, and so he did. Maul and Ahsoka leapt forward and did the same to the other one. The cultists who chased would fall to their deaths. Maul could tell that these loyalists weren't Force sensitive, so, in doing this, he saved them from having to fight them off. It wouldn't last forever, but it would give them enough time to find and kill Sidious. They continued down into the cloning facilities, where test tubes and science experiments existed. Maul told them to stay focused. Sidious was obsessed with immortality. This was the key to an eternal empire. Maul hissed as he ignited his lightsaber and walked forward. Ahsoka and Ezra could feel his rage. He had waited for this moment for a lifetime, and as they came into the main arena where the Emperor's throne sat, they found Darth Sidious. Ezra had encountered him before. Maul was tortured by him, and Ahsoka watched what he did to Anakin. Each of them had a reason to want him gone, and they would have their chance at it. Sidious smiled and told Maul that it was so surprising that he came all the way out here to pledge loyalty to him again. Like an abusive parent, he stepped off his throne and tilted his head, asking Maul if that was why he came home, so that he could be protected from the Jedi? Ahsoka and Ezra could see Maul step back, fear written not just in his eyes but his bodily functions. He was unsteady, his stature was weak, and he looked defeated before anything began. Ahsoka and Ezra stepped forward, and before they could, Sidious raised his hands, holding them each in place. He told Maul that he would protect him again. He was no longer a rival. He could feel that Maul had grown far beyond Vader's power. Sidious dug deeper, telling Maul that he knew how much he missed his master. The hypnotic voice of the Sith Lord seeped into Maul's ears like a lullaby of evil. Sidious then lowered his head and told Maul that all he needed to do is kill the Jedi. He could be redeemed. He could be a Sith once again. He could have all the power he ever wanted. Ezra and Ahsoka tried to break free, trying to tell him not to listen, but Sidious spoke over them. The quiet hum in his voice was filled with the bass inside the arena of the Sith. He told Maul that all he needed to do was strike them down, and then he could come home. Maul looked into Sidious's eyes, the abuser and the abused, locked in a contest of will. Maul didn't want this again. His skin trembled, and his hands were unsteady. He could go back. He could do it. He could kill his friends and serve Sidious again. He shook his head. He couldn't. A fearsome yell radiated out of him and echoed throughout the entire lair. Sidious laughed and told Maul to give in to his anger. Maul turned his head back and looked at Ezra and Ahsoka, frozen in place. Sidious told his former student to do what must be done. Maul's blades raised, and he looked at his friends. He told them he was sorry. No one could save him now. Fear slipped down their spines before Maul turned back and whipped himself at Sidious, a Sith howl echoing out of his voice as he engaged Sidious. The Dark Lord released his grip on the two Jedi, and they dropped. When they looked up, they saw a ferocious contest as the age-old Sidious fought with his lightsaber for the first time in decades. He parried every strike made by Maul. Sidious taught him every move, and this would be like clockwork for him. Maul threw his blade forward as Ezra and Ahsoka moved to intercept, but Sidious continued leading away from his friends. As Ahsoka and Ezra tried to keep up, the Sith cultists returned. They fought them off, as Ezra broke free to help his friend. Ahsoka had no issue dispatching the cultists that approached her. Maul threw Sidious to the ground, and he looked up. The Dark Lord told his former student to do it, to make the kill. He knew Maul wasn't strong enough to do it. To become a true Sith, Maul looked down and detached his lightsabers before driving them both down to the ground next to Sidious's neck. He told the Dark Lord that it was done. Sidious felt the ground beneath him buckle, and as it did, Maul stepped back and sliced off Palpatine's shoulders and looked down. The Dark Lord dropped to the ground, trying to adjust for having lost his arms. Maul turned to Ezra and told him to destroy the cloning stations. Sidious prepared the essence transfer into an unready Snoke clone. It would be something. But as his body slammed into the Zyston-class Star Destroyer in the shipyards, there was nothing for him to do, or nowhere for him to go. The Dark Lord was killed on impact, and due to his death, chaos unfolded around him. Because despite Vader technically being the last Sith Lord, he at this exact moment was dealing with his own change. He had found his son on Cloud City. The beginning of his return to the light had started. The Sith would be destroyed, and as a reaction, the Sith Eternal, the Final Order, and everything belonging to the Sith began to buckle and split and blow up. The three used each other to escape and used the same pathway they used to get here to get out, escaping Exegol as the Sith were destroyed for good. While Vader's turn wouldn't be immediate, without Sidious pushing him down, he'd be called to lead the Empire, and without his master breathing down his back, he wouldn't be called to stay a Sith. Instead, Vader knew that in the galaxy that would come, he couldn't live in it, so he worked. He fought with Luke again, not on a Death Star, but in an Imperial outpost. It was there where he learned that Luke would never be turned, and in a moment of realization, he knew what to do. Emperor Vader would send Imperials to their deaths. He would cripple their military and expose every facet of it to the Alliance. Vader would do anything to claim his son's love and respect, and as he learned of the daughter, he would ensure he made up for the carnage he had done. Vader couldn't allow this empire to survive, and for the following few years, the Emperor would self-sabotage everything, leading to the imminent collapse of the Empire and what would later become the Imperial Remnant. Because everything went through him, he exposed every plan and lie they had. Nothing they did saved them from themselves. Despite his actions, he wouldn't be given freedom by the new power that rose. The New Republic believed he was far too dangerous for the galaxy. However, he was given his amnesty. Vader could become Anakin again, and he'd have bottom-tier clearance with New Republic military operations. He wouldn't be able to do anything with it, but essentially he could live his life. But if he was around the public, then he'd be shooed away. He had 2 strikes. If he got both, he'd be detained and executed. Truthfully, this was a light sentence, especially for him. He got his family. His daughter would come around eventually, but he had his son to start with. Anakin didn't need to be on Coruscant, so he found himself a villa on Naboo, and found his own peace there. His son would spend time with him, and eventually, the two of them would restart the Jedi Order. Leia would complete her training at some point, but focus on her political life inside the New Republic. Despite her father being discovered as Vader, the New Republic never removed her from office, because he had redeemed himself just enough, which was just enough for her. Ezra would return home, which is wherever Hera, Sabine, Zeb, Callus, and Chopper were. Ahsoka would eventually find Anakin and Luke, learning about their own lives, and then she, eventually taking on Sabine as her own student. Anakin would adore Sabine, and be proud of Ahsoka for continuing the lineage. Ezra could have done that, but he was more interested in being there for his little brother. As Kanan trained him, he would train Jason, but there was always hope that they could find Kanan Jarrus, a day that would come when they would find him on Peridea. It would also be that day that he, along with Thrawn, returned to the galaxy, but without the Empire, Thrawn was left to his own demise, while Kanan would be able to come home and see what he missed in the 10 years he spent on Peridea. Maul during this time would stay with the Ghost. Spectre 8 would be his call sign. While Ezra would never go and join the new Jedi Order, he'd be a part of the family he always wanted to be around. Maul did too, and he would have a fulfilling life until the day he died, surrounded by those who actually did care about him. And that, my friends, is our wholesome PP story. Anyway, special thanks to our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pyrmark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandaddy Bane, Laliand, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Sharkman Dory, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu 670, Anakin Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sith Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Gunley 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legally Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, Matthew First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Denwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Swim other ways, go check out the Patreon. Pretty cool stuff on there. Anyways, let's talk about this story. The main thing is, though, Ezra wouldn't be as caring as Obi-Wan. He's a Boken Jedi, so he's not going to have the same moral high ground that Obi-Wan would have. See what I did there? Anyways, as for Maul and Ezra working together, I thought about having them interact with Luke and Leia, but we've done that before and before and before, and so I wanted this story to be more of a centralized focus on Ezra and Maul's dynamic as basically brothers in the same sense that Savage and Maul were, but him actually doing this right, and then them working together with Ahsoka to fight Sidious, which I thought would be a much more interesting dynamic, while still allowing Vader to have his redemption and stuff like that, but the fight being focused with 3 characters that we don't usually work with. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.